Hello, dear viewers. After several months, I have come to you online. I am seriously moved. The very recent casualty, the civilian property, the human casualty, the property casualty, which has been heavily caused by the airstriking and the military actions taken by Israeli authority on Gaza strips, on the innocent people of the Palestinians. I think that the whole community of the world has already been moved with this atrocity, the atrocious killing of the innocent people by the Israeli authority. I'd like to give a description of the casualty of life and property faced by the Palestinian innocent people in Gaza Strip. Since you have come to know everything in newspapers and other print and electronic medias, you're very clear about it, but in connection of my speech, I'd like to mention it in my speech today. 232, including 65 children and 38 women, have been killed by the Israeli airstriking and military actions in Gaza Strip. And 8,000 people have been injured seriously and admitted in different hospitals of Gaza. 2,000 housing units have been totally damaged. 74 public buildings totally demolished, and 3 large mosques have been totally destroyed by the reckless and ruthless striking of the Israeli Air Force. 16,800 houses, 40 mosques, 74 public buildings have been totally destroyed. 66 educational institutions have been partly damaged, and 600,000 students have been isolated from their academic life, and the life of those students have become uncertain. What will be their future? Only God knows. 20,000 people have lost their houses. 70,000 people have been forced to leave their houses, and all these people are exactly wandering under the open sky. And not only that, if you see different news agencies, the American Senator Bernie Sanders has already delivered a speech in the American Senate that it is a huge human casualty, and in Gaza Strip people are wondering, like the extreme refugee condition. There is no electricity, there is no power supply, there is no water supply, hospitals are damaged, everything has been collapsed. Everything has been collapsed in a very large scale. How the Israeli government is doing the atrocity deliberately and in a very, very atrocious way. The world community can understand it very clearly. But I am very much surprised to see the inactive mode of the United Nations organization. It is my humble question, what is the functions of the United Nations organization? What was the purpose? Which exactly moved to form the biggest international organization? In a very brief sentence, I would like to tell the prime function of the United Nations organization. It is the prime duty of the United Nations organization to protect the life and property of every citizen of the world, and especially the member state of the world. But it is very, very surprising that the United Nations is found totally inactive to do any sort of action against the Israeli reckless attack on the innocent Palestinian people. It is since the inception or the foundation of this largest organization of the world, that is United Organization, this organization is totally controlled by the permanent members, the superpowers, the mightiest nations of the world. They are controlling and regulating everything in the United Nations. And that is why the innocent, poor, and the underprivileged nations are not getting any sort of service from the United Nations organization. No considerable service we are exactly getting from the United Nations at all. For example, I would like to tell that regarding our refugee problem, that's Rohingya refugee problem, we did not find any concrete, any formidable action from the United Nations organization to take these refugees back to their motherland, Myanmar. We have not found at all how the United Nations can exactly unmoved to see this sort of large-scale atrocity. I cannot understand it. We are not getting any sort of statement against Israel, a formidable statement against Israeli atrocity, particularly on the innocent people of Palestine, particularly recent atrocity committed by Israeli military and Air Force in Gaza Strip. It is very much unfortunate. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres cannot take or has not taken any sort of action against Israeli government yet. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, for this atrocity committed by his country, by the military, by the Air Force of his country, should be produced or should be considered as a war criminal by taking the measure of the United Nations organization. United Nations organization to take the initiative to produce Benjamin Netanyahu before the International Court of Justice Hague, and he should be prosecuted as a war criminal. But we have not seen any sort of active step about it. Now, I'd like to tell something very briefly about the state of Israel. In fact, Israel is not a state. Israel has created Tel Aviv, has created a capital named Tel Aviv, and they have decorated the city with magnificent buildings. But this is not a state. It is the gathering of some people migrating from the Eastern European Semitic states. And some commentators I have seen in several newspapers and electronic and print media that they have got the legacy in Middle East. I'd like to tell something about it. Israeli community or the Jewish community faced persecution, exodus or something like this, and they had to be diaspora many years ago. My question is that why this particular community had to face this sort of problem since the ancient period? What was their problem? Definitely they had the problem in a very specific way. You know that chauvinism is a term which is very dangerous, particularly for any community, for any nation, and not only that, for international community. Chauvinism is a sense which exactly is created, which is found very specifically in the mind of almost every Jewish people. They like to think themselves as superior to all human races of the world. This is a problem. And they have got a common sentiment to undermining the people of other communities of the world. It should not be accepted in the modern world, in the world of the 21st century. And other thing is that the economic policy of the Jewish community is not exactly ensuring anything for the common people of a country. They believe in a particular sense of getting money or earning money, and the policy is money begets money, but they do not feel exactly the problems of other community for their economic policy. And that is why from the ancient period, they have got, the Jewish community had the problem with the state establishment. And this sort of problem of chauvinism and the inhuman economic policy always found exactly a conflicting situation between them and the state authority. And that was the reason for them to face exodus and to become diaspora. They had crossed the border of Middle East and stepped in the European countries, particularly the Eastern European Semitic states, many, many years ago. That means hundreds and thousands of years ago. And I would like to tell it specifically, in the first century, the settlement of the Jewish people started in the Eastern Semitic states. So we have passed already more than 2,000 years exactly when they migrated and settled in the Eastern European countries. And by this time, the Jewish community had been assimilated with the mainstream of culture, history, heritage of the countries, of the world regions where they had been living. And you know that why they have taken the decision to return to Palestine. Why? Because they had been assimilated. You know that the names of the maximum Israelis who had been migrated from Poland and other Eastern European countries, their names bear the testimony that they are no longer the Arabs. They had been assimilated with the European culture, European language, European history, European food habit, in everything. And they have lost their very, very ancient identity. I think that the creation of the Israeli state is a kind of conspiracy. It is a conspiracy exactly played by the imperial Western power, the colonial imperial Western power. Particularly the Jewish people started coming to Palestinian land, seizing and robbing the lands of the innocent Palestinians by the strong backing of Britain, France, and the United States of America. They had a plan exactly to create an Israeli state, to make a constant unrest in Middle East. It was the objective, the prime objective of the Western powers to take the control of the wild resource of Middle East. And that is why, by creating a state like Israeli state on the basis of religion, the Western powers wanted to create a certain kind of constant irritation under situation in the Arab world. And we have been observing this for several years, for several decades. The Arab people have been facing so many problems. So many battles have already been taken place in Middle East. And you know that it is the slow seizing lands, robbing lands, properties, killing over the years. And the Western powers are watching this because it is their only design to see this. Like, you know that we have to tell something. We should know one thing, that nothing can be hidden, nothing can be concealed in the 21st century, because this century is noted and specified particularly for the expansion of the information technology. The technology is too much often, information technology is very much strong, so nothing can be hidden at all. You know that the creation of Israeli state is the sole purpose of the Western power. I think that it has been revealed right now. And I would like to tell something about some major battles by which the Israeli Authority exactly took the positions in Arab land. You know that in the war of 1967 and in the war of 1973, Israel exactly took the position of Golan Heights and Sinai Valley, Sinai Peninsula. Golan Heights from Syria they had taken, and Syria and Sinai Peninsula they had taken from the Egypt. It is the Egyptian land, and Anwar Sadat tried his level best exactly to retake this land as it is the part and parcel of Egypt, but he was totally failed. He ensured a battle in 1974, 73, to take Sinai Peninsula back from the Israeli occupation, but he was failed. He could not exactly win the war perfectly to take the formidable position, to take his land back from the Israeli occupation. And that is why he had to enter into an engagement. He had to enter into an agreement which is known as Camp David Agreement, which was presided over by the then President of the United States of America, Jimmy Carter. Anwar Sadat was not willing to exactly to enter into such an agreement because his countrymen and a certain group of Egyptian people and a certain group of Egyptian military did not approve Anwar Sadat to go to this sort of agreement, that is Camp David Agreement. But Anwar Sadat did not find any alternative, and that is why he had to engage this sort of agreement, which was totally unequal agreement, and Israel had received so many facilities, particularly for their state. Egyptian President Anwar Sadat had to sacrifice his life for his engagement in the Camp David Agreement with Israel, because the people of Israel and the military section, the people of Egypt and military section of Egypt did not want any sort of relation between Egypt and Israel. And that is why Camp David Agreement exactly made a heavy penalty for Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat had to sacrifice his own life. In 1981, in 6th October, Anwar Sadat was shot dead when he was taking salute in the parade ground of Cairo on the National Day from the military of Egypt. One military vehicle was running towards him. When the military vehicle was very near to Anwar Sadat, suddenly a young officer with the rank and status of captain took his gun and started firing, targeting Anwar Sadat. Several bullets hit him very seriously, and Sadat was seriously injured. His bodyguards and other security forces were taking him to the hospital, but he was not able to go to the hospital. He died. That was the tragic death of an Arab leader. Sadat was very close friend to our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. During the time of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Anwar Sadat visited Dhaka, and he ensured Bangabandhu to continue the campaign of getting the recognitions of Arab countries in our newly independent country. Dear friends and viewers, I'd like to make a second delivery, particularly on the background of the creation of Israeli state, which is still considered by many statesmen, by major portion of the people of international community as an illegal state. Until then, Allah Hafiz, stay safe and blessed.